What is up, YouTube? I'm Devon DaVinci, leader of the Renaissance crew, and you're watching DaVinci Reacts. Today I have a reaction for you guys from a YouTuber that appeared in a cameo in the animated History of China Part 2 video I did, and that is a channel called Knowing Better. Now, I've done reactions to their stuff in the past, one video about media bias. I believe I did another video of theirs, or of his. I did mistakenly call him the cynical historian because that's another YouTuber, completely different. But I started following him around the same time, so that's the reason why I confused him. But I wanted to go ahead and correct that. Knowing Better, that is the channel. And if you want to see more of their content, I will have a link in the last 30 seconds of this video that'll pop up right around here. Click on it. It'll take you to their channel. You can watch their videos. They have a ton of other topics that they have. And also, I will have a link for the original video as well. If you want to show both of our channels support, the best way you can do it is by watching our videos. One thing you can do that I recommend for those that don't want to watch the video twice is to right-click the original link in the description box, open it in a new window, put it on mute, and have the video play in the background while you're watching my video. By the time mine's done, I can almost guarantee you theirs will be done as well, and you'll have given both of us a view. Now, with that being said, I do want to do a quick shout out real quick too. And forgive me, Knowing Better. If you're watching this video, I don't know if you are. It would be amazing if you were. I'm a big fan of yours. But if you are, just know this video is going to be dedicated 100% to you, or 99% to you. I do want to give a quick shout out for those that are looking for more historical channels. Those of you know that there's been YouTube channels that have started popping up with history teachers. They really cover historical videos, things like that. And there's been a couple of YouTubers that have popped up that I really want to draw attention to because, well, I enjoy their content. They have a lot to offer. One of the YouTube channels that popped up that, besides Terry the historian, don't get me wrong, Terry is great as well, but we all know about him. He's the goat. He's the big one. But there's been some smaller ones that have popped up that also offer some unique things. There's one channel called Essek History. It's ESSEK History. This is someone that I believe he's European. I think Eastern European, but he covers a lot of videos, and it's interesting getting a different perspective from someone like that. And there's also another history reactor, and I want to try to get right to them. I would imagine they would have popped up by now, but I can find it easy. One second. I had it popped up, but it disappeared on me. I'll probably cut this part out. Okay, I got it. The other YouTuber is called Social Stub. Now, they're much smaller YouTube channels than Terry, the history teacher. And so they probably don't get as much attention. So I just wanted to draw attention for those of you that were looking for reactors that specialized in history, that react to history-related videos. Those are a couple channels that you can check out. And that's it. So I want to go ahead and jump back to Knowing Better because this is his video. And for those of you that are just popping in, it's 4 minutes in. I still haven't got to the video yet. This video is called Obeying Authority. Now, this is all about the behavior of people. Well, I would imagine it's more about, I guess, like, for example, when dictatorships form, how is it that they're able to get as far as they're able to get, despite the fact that most people should be able to see from a mile away that what they're doing is tyrannical. So let's go ahead and watch this video and see what Knowing Better has to say about it.
Old school psychology is a lot of fun. Learning about the old experiments where they trick the participants into doing something silly is probably the first thing that hooks people. It's even more fun when you can spot those effects in the real world.
I know what you're doing. He's very good when it comes to things like this. I get it. It's subliminal messaging.
You just flinched, didn't you? Congratulations,
Not really.
You've just been conditioned. There won't be any beeps after this, so you can...
Matter of fact, I'm going to go back to the beginning so we can get the full experience of that, because I kind of stopped it right at that point, and it kind of ruined the point of it, whatever.
Old school psychology is a lot of fun. Learning about the old experiments where they trick the participants into doing something silly is probably the first thing that hooks people. It's even more fun when you can spot those effects in the real world. You just flinched.
The noise,
Congratulations,
it didn't make me
you've
flinch,
just been
but
conditioned.
it was annoying.
There
like,
won't be any
this is
beeps
too
after
loud.
this, so
You're right.
you can adjust your volume back. Pavlov's
like ear rape.
dog, Skinner's box, and even social experiments on conformity where a participant knowingly gives the wrong answer in order to fit in with all of the wrong people around them are hilarious. And interesting enough that they're taught in every intro psych class. But a few of these early fun psych experiments have a bit of a controversial side.
Now, when I was going to college, one of my ideas was I wanted to try to take, obviously, the courses that would lead towards graduation, but I wanted to take courses that I felt were essential for, well, just living life. Like, I feel like these are courses that should be taught in regular public school, or I'm not sure what the UK equivalent of it is. What would you call school that is before you get to like university and stuff? I get like grade school, primary school, whatever. I forgot. But I felt like certain classes should be taught from the beginning, and those classes are like psychology, finance, self-defense, things like these should be things that are taught when you're in school, because a lot of the stuff that we learn or they make mandatory are things that we never really use for the rest of our lives. Now, obviously, I collected a little bit of student loan debt because of that, but it did help me out. Don't touch that stove. Don't put soda in the freezer. Now you know better.
This video is brought to you by Skillshare. Psychology as a field has existed in some form for as long as people have been thinking about thinking. But modern interest in psychology really took off after World War II, partially because millions of new people, whether they be veterans or children of veterans, were just starting to get
Montgomery GI Bill sent 9 million veterans to college between 1944 and 1949.
into college, and every school and department was growing. But they also wanted to explain the Nazis. Psychology as a field really wanted to know how or why the Holocaust could have occurred if people are generally good. And could it happen here? The general consensus in America and the rest of the West was that no, it could not have happened here. Americans are fundamentally good and would never do that. It wasn't until a few studies came out in the 60s and 70s that that assumption was challenged. The first major one was by Stanley Milgram. You know who Milgram is. Even if you don't know his name, you're aware of his research. He's the one who came up with 6 degrees of separation. He called it the small world phenomenon, and before the internet, he tested and figured out that you are connected to any other person on Earth by an average of 6 links. So a friend of a friend of a friend of a friend of a He also studied the idea of the familiar stranger and planted lost letters in various cities to see who would mail them. But he's most famous for the study he conducted in 1961. He ran 18 different variations of this test, but the general story goes like this. 2 participants would show up to the office. These were not college students, but people from the community. Grocery store clerks, bankers, electricians, normal everyday people. Other versions of the test also included women and people of color. The experimenter would greet them and inform them that this is a study on memory and learning. They wanted to see if punishment was just as powerful of a motivator as a reward. So rather than getting something for being right, you were punished for being wrong. One of the participants pulls a roll out of a hat to determine who is the learner and who is the teacher. The learner is then strapped into a chair in a separate room with a speaker and 4 buttons, but no microphone. The teacher returns to the main room with the experimenter, and their job is to recite word pairs to the learner, like blue sky and young boy. Later, the learner is asked to remember the pair. They're presented with the word blue and several multiple choice options, which include the word sky. When the learner inevitably gets something wrong, they're given a shock by the teacher. These start at 15 volts, which isn't much more than licking a 9-volt battery. But the more they get wrong, the higher the voltage, all the way up to 450 volts. The teachers are often surprised that without a microphone, they can still hear the learner protesting through the walls.
Wrong. Answer is neck. 300 volts.
In some cases, the learner stopped responding entirely. This caused a few teachers to question whether they should continue, but ultimately, of nearly 800 participants, 2/3 of them ended up giving the non-responsive learner multiple 450-volt shocks. None of the learners successfully memorized all of the word pairs. That's the version of the story you would have been told if you were a participant. If you're at all familiar with psychology, you were probably pulling your hair out. Sorry about that, but some deception was necessary. As was the case with Milgram, who was actually studying obedience to authority. In truth, one of the participants was a Confederate, someone working with the experimenter. The roles were not randomly assigned. The actual participant was always the teacher. The learner wasn't actually hooked up to anything and was never being shocked. The word pairs didn't matter at all. What they were really testing was whether the teacher would apply what they believed to be a lethal shock to someone when told to continue by an authority figure.
That's genius. And yeah, like I said, like when you put authority over somebody and say, hey, you got to do this, it's crazy how far some people will go, because it's like, well, they told me to do it. And then people wonder like why the Nazis were able to go as far as they were able to go. And it's like, you'd be amazed how far some people will go when authority tells them to do it. Especially, and then you throw on top of that the possible risk that your family could be hurt if you don't do what they say. And it's like, yes, that can happen. It can happen anywhere in the world. There's atrocities all the damn time. It wasn't just the Nazis. So this lets us know that in human nature, we would do that. So the sooner we understand that, the better.
A scientist in this case. Oftentimes the participant would protest, but they were verbally urged to continue.
I mean, who's going to take the responsibility if anything happens to that gentleman?
I'm responsible for anything that happens here. Continue, please.
All right, next one, slow.
Across all of the variations of this experiment, 2/3 of people flipped the final switch, while the other third quit somewhere along the way.
I'm sorry, just pause one more time. I wonder if they told them after everything ended, like, hey, turns out he wasn't really connected to anything. This was just a test to see what you would do. I wonder how many people like had a realization like, damn, I went that far. Like how many people had that I'm a monster revelation?
0 people got up to physically check on the learner. Because someone dressed as a scientist told them to continue, most average, everyday Americans, including women, would, at the very least, torture someone with a few painful electric shocks, even if they didn't go all the way. That was unsettling news for many Americans. Nazi war crime trials were going on at the same time, and many of them used the defense that they were just following orders. And now we have a study saying most Americans would just follow orders too. Almost immediately after publication, procedural and ethical questions were raised about Milgram's experiment. They only did it because they were pressured to. Well, yeah, that was the variable being tested. If they wanted to stop and they weren't pressured to continue, they stopped. They lied to participants about what they were testing. If you're told that this is a study on whether people will do terrible things when told to by an authority figure, you're not going to act normally, are you? The deception was necessary. The participants thought they killed someone. Yeah, every participant was debriefed and the learner came out to show them that they were okay. Not only were they not dead, but they were never being shocked in the first place. They even interviewed the participants years later and found no lasting psychological damage. But still, the participants know that if something as simple as a wire were connected, they would have killed someone.
I'd be more shocked if I was the participant, the fact that I'd be willing to go that far. Instead of, like, I wouldn't even care about the idea of, oh, I thought I killed some. Like, that, don't get me wrong, during that time when it happens, that would be the thing on my head. Like, I might have just killed somebody. But the biggest thing would be, like, after the fact, when they tell you that the person was okay, you'd be like, damn, I was willing to kill this person for what? Like, if, like, I could have killed you, and I was the one that was in control of flipping that switch, and I still flipped the switch. If I was one of them, like, it'd be eye-opening.
Participants know that if something as simple as a wire were connected, they would have killed someone. They flipped the switch thinking they did. They didn't, and they know they didn't, but they would have. And while none of the participants reported any lasting mental trauma, Knowing that about yourself can really change your perspective.
Exactly.
Milgram's study, as
I'd like
he
to see the
performed
future
it,
study.
probably wouldn't happen today. But his results have been replicated under modern ethical conditions dozens, if not hundreds of times. It's pretty well established science. And in the end, his study did follow ethical guidelines for the time. Psychology was an emerging field, and while they did have review boards, they were still figuring out where the boundaries were. Milgram's study was approved by an IRB, as was another famous study which pushed some limits a decade later, known as the Stanford prison experiment.
I've heard about this one. This one is interesting. You guys, for those of you that don't know, pay attention to what he's about to say, because this is crazy. And it's funny because this also goes into the whole police, Black Lives Matter protest and everything that's going on right now. It's funny how much this connects with it because, well, just listen to it.
A study which pushed some limits a decade later, known as the Stanford prison experiment. As we'll get to, even calling it an experiment is controversial. The usual story is that Dr. Zimbardo took a group of ordinary college kids and randomly assigned them to be either a guard or a prisoner in a mock jail in a basement. The guards were given uniforms, sunglasses, and billy clubs. The prisoners wore smocks and chains and were each assigned a number. Before long, the guards had turned sadistic, abusing the prisoners and having them perform a number of degrading tasks. The experiment got so out of hand that Zimbardo shut it down after only 6 days. That's the TLDR version you'll find in most intro to psychology textbooks, and it's the version Zimbardo has made a career out of telling, usually as a way of discussing the power of the situation over the individual. Just like Milgram's experiment, criticisms of the ethics and procedure came out almost immediately and have been in the background ever since. So it also serves as an example to discuss ethics and science. But unlike Milgram's experiments, there are some questions about whether the Stanford prison experiment is scientific at all, and those criticisms have reached a boiling point. A few years ago, a movie was made about the Stanford prison experiment called the Stanford Prison Experiment. Based on Zimbardo's account of events, he even served as an advisor for the film. As far as I can tell, the movie is reasonably accurate. A few characters are composites of different people, and a few of the events are combinations of things that took place separately, but for the most part it stands up. What I found most interesting about the movie is that if you're aware of the criticism, you'll see it in the movie. It's touched upon several times. But if you only know the textbook version, you might miss it. The first issue is something called selection bias. In Milgram's experiment, the participants were a representative cross-section of society, everyday normal people. The Stanford prison experiment was not. Zimbardo put an ad in the paper reading,
"Male college students needed for psychological study of prison life, $15 per day for 1 to 2 weeks, beginning August 14th.
You may not think it,
So
but
because
this is
they're males.
loaded with information that skews the pool of potential subjects.
Okay, so male college students, $15 a day, so chances are they don't have a job or they're young. Well, they're college students, of course. Well, that's really all I can get from it. They're young male college students. And I guess for the time, maybe not as many people of color were in college. I'm not really sure. I would imagine it was, but maybe not a lot. So maybe it was predominantly white, I'm guessing. I don't know.
Male college students are fine. It's not representative of the population as a whole, but it is for a prison population. And the ad specifically says this is a study about prison life, so only people who have some sort of interest in prisons, positive or negative, are going
That's
to
true.
apply. Likewise, this is a 2-week study near the end of summer, so you're only going to get unemployed college students with free time and an interest in prisons, which
Again,
is
true.
not a representative sample. 70 students applied and were put through a battery of psychological tests and interviews to find the most stable and, quote, normal students. They narrowed the list to 24, set aside 6 as alternates, and divided the remaining 18 students by coin flip into prisoner or guard roles. So far, so good. While the selection process only yielded a specific type of person, there shouldn't be any major differences between the two groups, at least in theory. It's at this point that I need to explain to you that this study was not originally about the power of the situation, or authority, or assuming roles. It was about the de-individuation of prisoners.
We're trying to strip away their individuality.
That's what the study was originally about. So the guards were under the impression that they weren't the subjects. They were simply there to help the experimenters. On guard orientation day, they were told that they weren't randomly selected by coin flip to be guards. They were specially selected because of their unique qualifications, and that the end goal of this study was to create prison reform. This creates a problem known as demand characteristics. Now that the participants know what you're looking for, they're unconsciously going to try and help you find it. That alone would be bad enough. But in 2011, Stanford made the original tapes and data available to the public, and people have been digging through this new information to find out what actually happened. And it turns out, Zimbardo and his team did a lot more than just hint at what they wanted. Accusations that the guards had been coached have been around forever, but now it's pretty undeniable. Again, it's hinted at several times during the movie.
Do not forget, you have all the authority, and you're stronger than they are. They're starting to create bonds with each other.
Yeah, that definitely would muddy the results. Why would you?
But they never depict the same level of coaching that was present in reality. In a paper written shortly after the experiment, one of Zimbardo's research assistants stated,
Furthermore, even before I arrived, Dr. Zimbardo suggested that the most difficult problem would be to get the guards to behave like guards. I was asked to suggest tactics based on my previous experience as master sadist, and when I arrived at Stanford, I was given the responsibility of trying to elicit tough guard behavior.
that previous experience he mentions is actually somewhat important. He ran a small-scale prison experiment in his dorm room as part of a class assignment the previous semester. Zimbardo liked it so much that he wanted to replicate it on a larger scale. They knew the results they wanted before they even started. The goal was to see if they could get ordinary non-criminals to exhibit the same loss of individuality as seen in real prisons. The guards were there to make that happen. During the experiment, one of the guards wasn't quite playing the part, and we have an audio tape of the exchange.
We really want to get you active and involved because the guards have to know that every guard is going to be what we call a tough guard. And so far, I'm not too tough. Yeah, well, you have to kind of try and get it in you.
You don't get to tell a guard to toughen up and then tell the public that it was so weird that the guards spontaneously toughened up all on their own.
Pushing the narrative.
Zimbardo and his team are aware of this evidence and defend it by saying that vaguely telling a guard to toughen up doesn't necessarily mean that they should be cruel.
Yeah, this is eye-opening for me because I always believed the initial release information that talked about how like sadistic it got after so long and like that was it. So going more into detail, it is adding more context and background information that I didn't know about. So now I'm going to have to change the way I view this. This is something unique that you're going to see on YouTube, you guys. Somebody actually changing their opinion when presented with when presented with the full story. I'm not going to embrace my own ignorance and try to double down or whatever else. This is right, and until some more evidence comes out to convince me otherwise, this is now my new position.
They thought of the specifics all on their own.
So the guards' authority was challenged right off the bat, and the guards had to decide how they were going to handle that, and they had to decide it without our input.
Without their input, Zimbardo hired a few ex-convicts to help advise the study and create a realistic prison. While this person is somewhat of a composite character, the person he's based on wrote this op-ed in 2005.
Ideas such as bags being placed over the heads of prisoners, inmates being bound together with chains, and buckets being used in place of toilets in their cells were all experiences of mine, which I dutifully shared with the Stanford Prison Experiment Brain Trust months before the experiment started. To allege that all of these carefully tested, psychologically solid, upper middle class, Caucasian guards dream this up on their own is absurd.
Let me break this down for you because it's important. The Stanford Prison Experiment is used in psychology classes to demonstrate the idea of attribution. What made you do a specific behavior? Was it an internal motivation? You just felt like doing it because of some past experience or some quirk of your personality? We call that dispositional attribution. It comes from within. Or was it an external motivation? The temperature outside was too high, or a customer was just rude to you, so you reacted negatively. That's situational attribution. It comes from the environment. The Stanford Prison Experiment was in the news as soon as it started. Zimbardo invited the media to film the mock arrests that began the study. Shortly after the study was shut down, before he could evaluate his results, several real-world prison riots and escapes occurred. And guess who the media asked to weigh in? Zimbardo explained how the power of the situation turned everyday normal people into de-individualized prisoners or sadistic guards. And that's been the narrative ever since. This is a slide from a PowerPoint presentation I used to teach. I used the Stanford prison experiment to demonstrate situational attribution, but does it? In a study originally about losing your individuality, Zimbardo and his team instructed the guards to be tough and likely suggested methods to carry that out, then turned to the public and said, "Isn't it strange that these gods randomly decided to turn into such cruel individuals? Any well-adjusted person put into that role has the potential to do evil things." Any well-adjusted person? I don't know about that. Remember, this was a study on only 18 college students, 9 of which were guards, and only 3 of them were jerks.
Yeah, I would imagine that like between this and the last study that he talked about with the flip switches and the electric shocks, I would imagine it would take more effort to have a guard do something that would be considered cruel than a person just flipping a switch against somebody that they can't see. A lot of times there are certain factors that would would change the way we would interact with stuff, the way we would handle stuff. Like, for example, everybody knows about environmental dangers like littering and things like that, and throwing plastic in the ocean and dumping garbage outside. You don't really think about it because it doesn't, like, the damage that's being done isn't really directly in your face. But if you, let's say, throw one of those 6-pack plastic things that you get for soda and stuff, you throw one of those in the ocean, and then let's say like an hour later somebody brings you a dying seal with that thing, or not seal, but something that would be small, a turtle or something, with that thing wrapped around its neck and it's choking, you'd probably more likely be like, "Oh, I didn't mean it, I'm sorry," and maybe like from then on never do it again. So if you're confronted with the consequences of your actions, you're more likely to just learn from it. Like if you go across to some third world country where everything, like where poverty is really strong, to the point where like starvation is one of the leading causes of death in that area. If you go there and you actually meet the people and see how they struggle and things like that, it'll probably make you a little more grateful when it comes to like food and the stuff that you have, compared to if you never would have seen those people. Like, how grateful would you be when it comes to food? You'd probably be a little more picky and things like that, and afterwards you'd be more open. So yeah, it's weird to try to compare the two studies, but I think that yeah, I mean, personally, it depends on the personality. Some people, if you give them authority, or if you give them the ability to have, let's say that to have control over somebody else, some people will be responsible with that power and some people won't. That's the bottom line.
18 college students, 9 of which were guards, and only 3 of them were jerks. Most notably, the guard nicknamed John Wayne, who studied acting and put on a fake accent for the entire experiment. He famously said that he wanted to see how far he could take it. That's the self-selection bias at work. If only a third of your sample size turned cruel and you had to push them into it, is that really a valid, significant result? Earlier, I brought up that some people don't like to call this an experiment. It's more of a demonstration or a simulation. There was no control group or even variables. And while the experiment did pass a review board and was approved for funding, Zimbardo seemed to view the IRB as more of a guideline than an actual rule. He played it very fast and loose with the ethics. Everyone who participated in the experiment filled out an informed consent form, which laid out the purpose of the experiment as well as a few rules and expectations, which was thrown out almost immediately. Some loss of freedom was expected. This was a prison study after all, but it very quickly escalated out of control and became physically and emotionally abusive. And they weren't allowed to leave, even after screaming that they wanted out. In Milgram's study, the test was to see when you would quit. You were verbally encouraged to continue, but if you were done, that was it. That's how most studies work. If you want out, you're out. But this was a prison experiment, and if you let people leave at the first sign of trouble, you're not going to get a lot of useful data. So I get why they did it, but that doesn't make it right. Furthermore, the guards worked in shifts. They got to go home every day and take off the uniform. The prisoners did not. They were there around the clock. Now, I want to paint a picture for you, and it's going to be a somewhat dark picture. Imagine you sign up for a psychology study. You interview with the professor and grad students and get selected. A few weeks later, the real police show up to arrest you in front of your neighbors. It's okay, you know this is part of the study. You're brought in, booked like a normal criminal, deloused, and put in a cell. The guards, who are fellow students, are taking this way too seriously and start getting physical. You want out. You ask to talk to the professor, and they bring you to him, only he's not the professor. He's the superintendent of the prison. Prisoner 8612 famously broke down, and in order to assess whether he was faking, Zimbardo interviewed him personally, in character. The professor was no longer an outside observer. He was part of the experiment. Later, your parents come to visit. They're put through the same treatment as real families in real prisons on visiting day, and even act the part, asking if you're well fed and such. Then you're put in front of a parole board, where you plead for a release to the superintendent and various other faculty, who tell you that because you don't seem sincere in your repentance, you will serve the rest of your sentence. The people running the experiment just called you human garbage for committing a crime that you're pretty sure you did. The real police arrested you though. They aren't letting you leave, and your parents just visited you for like 15 minutes and said goodbye to you like they'd never see you again. And just to top it off, they bring in a real Catholic priest, not an actor, to tell you this is all real, not an experiment, and the only way you're getting out of this is with the assistance of a lawyer. That actually happened.
Seems like a bit of a sin.
Zimbardo really did do that.
I invited a Catholic priest who had been a prison chaplain to evaluate how realistic our prison situation was. I watched in amazement as half the prisoners introduced themselves by number rather than name. He explained that the only way to get out of prison was with the help of a lawyer. He then volunteered to contact their parents to get legal aid if they wanted him to.
That's so unbelievably unethical that it sounds like it should be illegal. Imagine being in that situation. You thought you were in an experiment, but everyone from the police to the professors to your parents to the priesthood are now telling you this is real. Several prisoners had mental breakdowns and had to be sent home. Students, they were students, not prisoners. Even I'm doing it now. The experiment was shut down after only 6 days rather than waiting the full 2 weeks. In another break from protocol, the students were paid for their time after the experiment. Normally you pay them before the experiment so as to not influence the results. Many students said that they were financially motivated to stick it out. Zimbardo did not demonstrate the power of the situation. All he did was replicate Milgram's obedience study. Only this time, actual people were being hurt. In Milgram's experiment, the teacher was the only true participant. They were encouraged to inflict punishment on a learner in the other room who was a Confederate and wasn't actually being harmed. The test was to see if the teacher would actually do it, which most of the time they did. In Zimbardo's experiment, the role of teacher and learner are replaced with guard and prisoner. The teachers are again encouraged to inflict punishment on the learners who are not Confederates and are actually being harmed. Who is encouraging the guards? Zimbardo and his team. Zimbardo was the scientific authority, the experimenter telling the guards to continue, which, just like in Milgram's study, they did. Nobody has been able to replicate Zimbardo's results without including the authority variable, whether that be a physical person or a vague feeling of for the greater good. Replications where they just put people into prisoner and guard roles and don't pressure them to act tough end up looking more like a summer camp environment. Most people aren't naturally inclined to be cruel. There needs to be some sort of external pressure or influence in addition to the role itself.
Or internal influence. Some crazy motherfuckers out there just doing crazy stuff. I can only imagine, because it sounds like they've had experiments like this. I can only imagine there's had to be like at least one story of somebody that took it too far when they didn't have to. Nobody was pressuring them.
There needs to be some sort of external pressure or influence in addition to the role itself. Just putting on a uniform doesn't turn you into a sadist. But Zimbardo has made a career out of telling people just that. In an effort to push prison reform, he's often said that prison abuses aren't the fault of a few bad apples, but bad barrels. Which isn't that spicy of a take, we all know the prison system is bad, but he adds the caveat that therefore, we shouldn't blame the apple. They were just put into a bad barrel. In the decades after the experiment, he has advocated for that view in front of Congress and served as an expert witness in numerous cases of prison abuse for the defense, even famously advocating on behalf of the soldiers responsible for Abu Ghraib. Since nobody has been able to reproduce Zimbardo's results in a laboratory setting,
For those of you that know fully about what Abu Ghraib is about, let me know, because this is the first time I've actually heard about it. I'd imagine it probably has something to do with soldiers shooting on civilians or something, but I don't really know. For those of you that do know, go in the comment section and let me know, please.
Abu Ghraib. Since nobody has been able to reproduce Zimbardo's results in a laboratory setting, his only supposed replications are real-world scenarios, which isn't how science works. And when you start defending war criminals by using your bogus prison simulation as evidence that they aren't responsible for their actions, you took a wrong turn somewhere. Unfortunately, Zimbardo has positioned himself as the Carl Sagan of psychology. He loves being on TV, and if you've ever seen a series or documentary on the topic, he was likely the host. It's very unlikely that he'll ever take a second critical look at the one experiment that has defined his career. He has too much to lose at this point. He was even the president of the American Psychological Association for a year, so publishing research that refutes him is risky. But I'll be interested to see what the academic community does with this new information over the next few months and years. Zimbardo's prison study is still in textbooks. Some psychologists say that it's still a useful example of situational attribution.
Like I said, I just learned about this extra
even
stuff.
if the story is untrue.
Even if the science was quirky or there was something that was wrong about the way that it was put together, I think at the end of the day, I still want students to be mindful that they may find themselves in powerful situations that could override how they might behave as an individual. That's the story that's bigger than the science.
So pick a different example.
First time frying a turkey. Stay inside, please. Stay inside.
Stay inside. Right. Get inside right now.
There, did he yell at her because he's a jerk or because he's about to deep fry a turkey and she's way too close? Dispositional or situational? So we're all okay with him yelling at her, but what about pushing? Is pushing okay? Maybe. I could see where a light push would be warranted. What about kicking? Would that be okay? I don't know about that one. So you're saying that while the situation calls for a behavior, there should be limits on that behavior. See how this is a more productive conversation to have than, I guess the power of the situation made them do that. It really isn't that hard to find another example to illustrate the concept that doesn't also perpetuate the narrative that war criminals aren't responsible for their behavior. Or maybe you want to run your own ethical study on the power of the situation.
Knowing better is a
skill
bet.
you can learn more about by going to
skl.sh/knowingbetter12. meant a lot to
Skillshare
him.
is an online learning community with thousands of courses taught by authority figures in their field. Take this course in project management to learn how to set effective goals instead of just vaguely seeing what happens when you put people in a fake prison. Or how to stick to a schedule rather than making things up on the fly. I would specifically recommend this section on reflection and improvement. We can all stand to learn from our mistakes. You can learn this and much more with an annual subscription costing less than $10 a month. And if you head over to skl.sh/knowingbetter12, you can get 2 months of unlimited access to all of Skillshare's courses for free. You'll also be supporting the channel when you do. So why couldn't we reflect, improve, and do these studies again? The usual answer is ethics. But that's not true. We've been replicating these studies under ethical conditions since the originals. With mixed results, like I said. No, the real issue is that you know about them. The original studies were done in the 60s and 70s. Nobody knew what psychology was or how they tested anything. People walked in as a completely blank slate. Now, as soon as you walk in, before you even fill out the consent forms, you're already trying to figure out what they're actually studying. Is this part of the test? Am I being recorded right now? Are the other participants secretly in on it? Vsauce attempted to do a recreation of the Milgram experiment, which supposedly shows the opposite, that people won't punish others. But both of the groups mentioned that at some point during the experiment, they doubted that the other team really existed. which they didn't. That's the end of the study right there. If you don't think the other person exists, then pushing the button to send a shock or siren is meaningless at best and defiant at worst. You're knowing so much and trying to figure it out is the problem. I used to work in an EEG lab, and after every session, without fail, the participant would ask, "So what are you really studying?" And I would have to disappoint them with the truth. Most of the time, we're studying what we told you we're studying. Even in the few times we used deception, the thing we were actually studying was even more boring than the fake out. Stop trying to play 4D chess against the experimenters. In the end, I would much rather you know the truth about these experiments and what they demonstrated or failed to demonstrate. So the next time you see Dr. Zimbardo on TV defending the latest prison guard to succumb to the power of the situation, you'll know better. I'd like to give a shout out to my newest Golden Fork patrons, Seth and Bitrain. If you'd like to add your name to this list of study candidates, head on over to patreon.com/knowingbetter, or for a one-time donation, paypal.me/knowingbetter. Don't forget to coach that subscribe button, check out the merch at knowingbetter.tv, follow me on Twitter and Facebook, and join us on the subreddit.
Well, there you go. Obeying authority. Everybody likes to think that they're above it and whatnot, but in certain situations, I'm pretty sure everybody has found themselves in where they do something that they kind of don't expect themselves to do. Like, the way you interact with people in regular life might be different than how you act to people to, like, while you're driving. Chances are you're probably a little bit less of a reasonable person when you're driving compared to when you're just walking down the street and talking to people. If somebody inconveniences you while walking, you're probably a little bit more forgiving than on the road. Now, don't get me wrong, the road has much bigger risk, and the cost of those screw-ups can be more costly, but at the same time, it's like, I know damn well I've said stuff on the road that I would probably not say to people because it's too much. Like, I know that this was likely a mistake. Flipping out, it doesn't make any sense. Like, I would get mad at people that are driving too slow in front of me. And it's like, if you're walking behind someone that's walking too slow, I'm willing to guarantee that what you say in that situation is a lot more milder than what you would say in a situation where you're driving behind someone too slow. But yeah, this is interesting. I like listening to studies like this because it shows people like their inner nature. Like, you think that you're a decent person that is okay with everything and just look on the bright side, but then when you get into these studies, it's like, okay, but this is what you actually are. And I don't know. I just like it. I want to try to find that documentary that they showed with the Stanford experiment. I don't know if it'll probably cover the more bullshit portions of the study, but whatever. I'll go into it with an open mind now because I looked at one side and I've heard the other side, and now I know better. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe, and share. I look forward to seeing you guys on my future videos. Again, the link for Knowing Better will pop up right around here. And I'll probably leave a link for his Patreon account because I know when it comes to historian videos, people that talk about history themselves, YouTube tends to demonetize those videos a lot. So there's a lot of history channels that are out there that are having real trouble making a living because their videos get demonetized for some unknown reason. I don't really know. It doesn't even have to be a video about a controversial topic. Just history videos tend to get demonetized. So if you want to show them support, the best way you can do it is through Patreon. I'll leave a link in the description box down below. I have a Patreon account myself. If you want to see exclusive content like me doing reactions to movies or me doing reactions to exclusive TV shows, I will be doing a reaction to The Office, the UK version. It'll be exclusive on Patreon. That is something that was recently voted in. So this Saturday I'll have a new movie reaction, and I will have that. I'm leaning towards The World's End as the movie, the Simon Pegg movie, and I'm going to do the Office UK reaction. But if you want to do that and join me in those reactions, my Patreon is only $1 a month. Be sure to go to the link in the description box and sign up. And I look forward to seeing you guys there. I'm going to give you the deuces. Hopefully you've been enlightened. I certainly have. And I'll see you guys on the next video. Deuces.